today.
Yep.
We've got 3 metrics that we're going to plot on one graph. Alright, workload at the bottom, in this case it's obviously watts. So we're going to have watts at the bottom. Started off at 80, ended up at what? Turned to 240 I think, wasn't it? Or 260. The turn to 260
let's
it
just
was.
say 260. I did get into 260.
You did? No, you did.
I
Yeah,
felt
you did.
it.
You did. On this side, I don't know why I'm drawing the indices, but I am. We're going to plot blood lactate, and that's expressed as micromoles per litre. Okay, this is just a concentration value unit of measurement. And on this side of the graph, we are going to record heart rate, and that's obviously going to be expressed in BPM. Okay, blood lactate will do something like this. We'll start off, I think you're about 2.6, something like that. I think it did come down. I think it did go 2.6, 2.3, or was it the other way around? I'll have to look. But going to start off nice and low down here. It's going to increase slightly as the test goes on. Then we're going to get to a point where we see a rapid increase. All right. Heart rate's going to do something similar. It's obviously going to start off down here. I think you were at 66 when you got on the bike. I think I looked. Something like that. Does that sound about normal for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about 66. And what you'll see is that'll increase. You normally see a slight plateauing, and then obviously it'll go up to fail. All right. We're going to use that data in 3 main ways. But before I talk about them, I just want to talk about blood lactate and energy systems and why we measure blood lactate particularly. So, are you alright? How's your biology? Can you remember any of the biology stuff?
It's been a while.
Been a while?
Yeah.
Been a while? Right, ATP. Remember what ATP is?
Adenosine triphosphate.
Well done. I like it. So it's the only sports physiology joke I know. Man walks into a pub, walks up to the barman and says, "I'll have a pint of adenosine triphosphate, please." Guy pours it, puts it on the bar and says, "Yeah, sure, that'll be ATP." ATP.
That's terrible. don't put that on your socials.
That's awful, right? So we've got 1-adenosine, I can't spell today. And we got 3-creatine phosphate. Yep. Alpha, beta, gamma bonds. Yeah. When we require energy, we split that gamma bond and that releases energy, right? Yep, we're happy with that, right? Now, we're using ATP all of the time. So every time I talk, every time you turn a pedal, every time you walk the dog, you're consuming ATP, right? All of the time. We produce that in 2 ways. Aerobically and anaerobically. Are you au fait and comfortable with what the terms aerobic and anaerobic mean?
Yeah, with or without oxygen.
Perfect. You're probably one of about 3 people who have ever managed to answer that.
I'm a physio though, so I'd like to think that I've got a rough...
Exactly that. I'll give you the dumbed down version.
I'll
give you the dumbed down version today anyway, because you know this stuff, right? So I'll give you the dumbed down version. Right. When we are producing ATP aerobically, the body utilises 1 molecule of either glycogen or glucose, right? Enters the mitochondria, there's O2 because we're working aerobically, and through a process of aerobic phosphorylation, our body produces, can you remember how many ATP?
6.
So either 36 or 38, depending on whether that was glycogen or glucose. If it's blood glucose, it has changed it slightly, or is it the other way around? One of them ways around. Whether that's glycogen or glucose, it has to convert one of them into a different state, but I can't remember.
Before it can be utilised.
Yeah, but I can't remember which way round it is. That's why you get 2 less. Right, the only I can't speak. The only byproducts of aerobic energy exchange
Carbon dioxide
and water. Right, so really efficient, really clean burning, 1 in 38 out. When we are forced to exercise in a state where our body can no longer deliver enough oxygen to the working mitochondria, we'll rely on our anaerobic energy system. Right now, the thing that people misunderstand about the anaerobic energy system is they think it's binary, that you do it all over here and then you switch that off and you turn to a purely anaerobic state. That isn't the case. Right? This is the sliding scale, right, of anaerobic contribution. So when you were down here at 80 watts, you were producing all of this aerobically. When you were at 260 watts at this end, you were probably producing 70-80% of it anaerobically. All right?
Felt
it's
that way.
this point, sorry, felt that way. Yeah. You were going a nice colour at that stage, Kate.
Yeah. It's still that colour.
No, you calm down a little. You've calmed down a little.
Tomato.
When we work anaerobically, it gets a lot more sugar hungry, and this is always a useful takeaway. Takes 2 molecules of glucogen or glucose or glycogen to start the process. Okay. Don't actually utilise the mitochondria for this. It is actually a form of fermentation that we use, right? So my favourite anaerobic process, and I say this as a joke because I don't drink, is yeast turning sugars into alcohol, right? That works in an airless, oxygen, whatever you want to call it, depleted environment, right? That's why they brew in big vats, etc., because it doesn't need oxygen. So we're working anaerobically, there's no O2 to be added, and our body only produces 4 molecules of ATP, right? Now, the real kicker with anaerobic contribution is,
The byproducts.
yeah, we still get CO2, we still get H2O, but we get lactic acid, and we get, would you believe, ethanol. So you do turn into a brewery. Now, that burning sensation that you feel in your muscles, when people go, oh, it's really sore, it's lactic acid, technically, yes, it is, but to be precise, it isn't. What lactic acid and ethanol actually do is reduce the pH value of the muscles. So you remember the old chemistry, 1 being very acidic, 14 being very alkaline. Human body runs at about 7.2, so just off of neutral. So neutral to ever so slightly alkaline. What these byproducts do is they reduce that pH value to an acidic value. And when you feel that burning sensation in your quads and your hamstrings and your calves and everywhere else, that's actually your muscles being bathed in acid.
Yeah, I think it was my heart and lungs that gave out, to be honest. My legs didn't feel...
Yeah.
It was everything else.
Because you've gone from this state to this state. The thing is with bike jaw is, you're on the bike, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Give or take, depending on the course. Yeah. The truth of the matter is over 10 minutes, are you going to feel the side effect of these? Probably not as much as, a longer event where it's built up over time. Yeah. But there is, from an energy production point of view, because, you've said this, you've analysed your data yourself, your last bike jaw, your heart rate was up here at like 170 odd. So you won't be delivering all of the needed oxygen to the working muscles.
Yeah.
Now, the reason that we measure blood lactate, and this was a very long-winded way to say this, the reason that we measure blood lactate is people get blood lactate and lactic acid confused. Blood lactate is actually a fuel source at this point, right? Blood lactate is the way that it delivers the glycogen, the glucose, the sugary substances to where it's required. So lactate is actually the fuel source. Anything that ends in 8's a sugar, right? Blood lactate is a fuel source. So by measuring lactate against workload, what we can ascertain is at any point, where are we on this sliding scale? So at 180 watts, what is the amount of your anaerobic contribution?
Yeah, I'm with you.
So
what's the split between the two systems?
100%. 100%. Because even in an event as short as bike joring, now obviously we've just discussed it, it's 10 minutes, it's flat out effort, you know, so take the years back, go for it, right? There is going to be more anaerobic contribution to a bike joring effort than there is, say, let's go mad, a marathon, 100-mile sportive, whatever. But it is still predominantly all endurance sports, anything lasting longer than a handful of seconds or up to a couple of minutes is predominantly an aerobic sport. You know, and the things that limit our aerobic energy system is mitochondrial health, stroke volume, so how much we can pump, stroke rate, how quick it will beat, hematocrit level that we were talking about earlier, how well can I transport it? You know, these are the things that, you know, predominantly limit our aerobic energy system. But we want to be over here producing 36, 38 molecules out of one molecule, nice and clean burning, rather than having all this crap floating about a system, right? Especially for bike joring, when you could be racing multiple times over one weekend, we don't want to be in a situation where we are carrying this into the next race, right, and the next event, right? So with bike joring, you know, yes, build that aerobic engine, keep an eye on what the anaerobic energy system's doing because we're going to need it, but also train our body to clear lactate effectively, especially in between races. So, what are we going to use this information for, right? So we've got workload, we've got input, so we've got an output and an input metric, and then we've got a physiological marker, shall we say. Well, we use this data in 3 very specific ways. Right? The first thing that we're going to do, and you've probably heard the term lactic threshold, anaerobic threshold. There was a heart rate one that was used back in the day called the deflection point. And it's interesting, I think you talked about it earlier, when you said you notice that your heart rate will go up to a certain level and you can sit there. Because what you see with most athletes is a plateauing before fail. And by that I mean the heart rate under workload will go 100, 110, 120, 130, 140, 150, 145, 155, 152, 148, 156, 150, 160, 170, and you see it curve up, do that across a slight plateauing before you get fail. Now, I think it was Coney, Moses' old coach, who pioneered this method, but he actually called this plateauing here the deflection point. And before they had the understanding of accumulated lactate and athletic failure, they'd plot speed or speed around a track or, you know, overgear up a static bike effort. They'd plot heart rate, they'd look at where this deflection point came in, and then say we're using heart rate, 150 BPM just for an example, that's where they'd set the intensity measures from.
Okay.
Alright? Obviously we can be a little bit more sophisticated than that now. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to identify this lactic threshold, anaerobic threshold, OBLA, or the onset of blood lactate accumulation, and we're going to use that to set our training intensity measures, right? Now, in the past, you know, you're training to power, and we were talking about this earlier. You understand the rank test, you get an FTP, and you set your zones from that FTP, right? The trouble is with just doing, or with like heart rate zones, you probably did do when you were running, probably went out and did a warm up and did some sprints, got your maximum heart rate, and then worked back a percentage from maximum or something like that. All of these methods are trying to identify this point, this tipping point of how much lactate we can sustain before we spiral out of control. right? So what we're going to do is we're actually going to identify that with physiological data. That's why we took blood lactate. There's different ways to interpret the data, and I'm sure things change all the time in the physio world and new methodology comes in. When this relationship between increasing lactate and failure was recognised, a lot of the big sports institutions, universities now did hundreds of these tests. They looked at all the data and they went, oh yeah, there's an uplift at this point, where it gets steeper. And they averaged out all the tests and they decided in their infinite wisdom that 4 micromoles was everybody's lactate threshold. So what they'd do is they'd look at 4 on the graph, they'd come across to where 4 intersected with it, and then you'd come up and again you'd use that heart rate, or if you wanted you'd come down and you'd look at an FTP, say, set on 4 micromoles. Now there are a number of places that still use a hard 4, and the truth be known, I've been doing this, I've been testing in this manner for many years. I don't know how many of these I've done, but it's hundreds. It might even be thousands. I don't know. It's hundreds. And I've never done this, but I suspect that if I went back and looked at everybody's lactate threshold, guess what? It's around 4. And it does seem a pretty hardwired value that 4 micromoles of lactate becomes, or numbers in advance of that, become unsustainable, and we get this uplift in lactate and therefore failure. Now it is quite a blunt tool. And my cup of tea fits in a running machine, even better, right?
I'd like to see you drink that whilst running.
Running. I don't know if I can run anymore, Kate, to be honest. I'm a little heavy for running these days. I still plot it, I still look at it, it is relevant. It is relevant. I've seen them as low as 3.7 from a lactate delivery point of view. I've seen them as high as 4.4, 4.5. Now, again, we were talking about muscle bias earlier, weren't we? Type 1, type 2, type 2A. Some of lactate resilience might be the wrong way to put it, but some of that is genetic. It's that predisposal of muscle fibres, right? I know from testing when I was fit and active and racing, my lactic threshold plotted as an OBLA came in at about 4.2, 4.25, something like that. So I could tolerate a little bit more. I suspect from looking at your numbers, yours would be slightly in advance of 4. But we'll plot it and we'll plot it and we'll have a look. To personalise this a little bit more, something called OBLA, or the onset of blood lactate accumulation, is now a more preferred method for identifying lactic threshold, and the most popular method is something called the Dmax principle. And what you do with the Dmax principle is you take the highest recorded value, you take the lowest recorded value, whether that's the first or it may be, I think yours is about there, because I think yours went 2623, actually came down, which isn't unusual. You do see that. And I think, the body's response to exercise sometimes can be, turn everything on. Oh no, we don't need that, turn it off, right? You then intersect these values, making, surprise, surprise, a D. It's called the Dmax principle, and you look at the maximum depth of that, and again, you can come down to here or you can come back across to here, right? The truth be known, especially from a heart rate point of view, if you plot a hard 4 OBLA, you look at it as a visual cue, you look at deflection point, it's normally only about a 2 to 4 BPM variance in what you get, right? And I can live with 2 to 4 BPM. Yeah. I can live with that. Especially if you'd have had 2 strong espressos before you got on the bike, it probably skewed them figures a lot more than that.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing that we're going to do. We're going to identify through your lactate response what your threshold values are. The reason they're so important is when we then set your training zones, if we know this number, we'll take 150 as an example because we've been using it. If we take 150 BPM and then we set our anaerobic zones north of that, and we set our aerobic zone south of that, right, and we set our tempo threshold values in the middle, we know they're actually set on this physiological data, what your body's doing. Therefore, if we want to isolate this aerobic mitochondria and work on our aerobic energy system, we know that working at this intensity here is going to isolate that mitochondria. Because energy systems are the same as anything. They need to be put under the correct amount of load to stimulate and recruit an adaptation. And the analogy I always use, and you'll get this as a physio, because I'm sure you see people doing some really strange exercises. You know, if you want a big bicep, you go into a gym, don't you? You pick up a weight, and you, whatever exercise you're doing, you isolate that bicep. You don't pick a weight up and do this and expect to get a big bicep, right? Energy systems are the same, right? So to isolate these in the correct way, we've got to know what input and output intensities actually isolate them. Because the biggest thing there's two biggest things that athletes do wrong. Firstly is too much intensity all of the time. So they're training from here to here and they never train over here.
That's probably what I do.
Right, yeah. You never go out and think I'll do a zone 2 one today, or I'll do a sweet spot session, or I'll teach my body. You know, sweet spot's an interesting intensity. So classically set at 85 to 95% threshold, and what you're doing is you're doing that all the time in your training. You're getting towards threshold but not quite. And what that does is your lactate level's rising but you're still clearing it. Right?
I do a lot of my stuff is probably at threshold, to be honest.
Yeah. The trouble is with threshold training is if you're sitting at FTP or at your lactate threshold heart rate, you're doing that. You're just crossing that line all the time, right? You're here. The problem is with that is, again, that's isolation, right? You're not putting this under enough pressure to cause an adaptation. You're not putting this under enough pressure to cause an adaptation. I mean, you will get fitter. All exercise has benefits, right? You know, and there is muscular adaptations that we need to consider. And we do need to, when we're doing an event like bike touring, which flat out for 10 minutes, sometimes we need to go and ride flat out for 10 minutes, right? But it's not something that you can do all the time as a long-term strategy. You know, it will hinder your progression. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. We are going to accurately identify this point, and we are going to set you the relevant training zones. So at least we know when we are training, we know what adaptation we're getting from that training. Right? I just want to check that camera because I'm not even sure it's on. Is it on? It is on. Normally got a red light on, that hasn't got a red light on, so I think my camera's decided to have a
It's flashing at the back.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Then I probably normally look at the back. That's probably why. Yeah. Second thing we use this data for is benchmarking, right? Purely and simply benchmarking. The nice thing about basing intensity on lactic threshold is that curve is incredibly trainable. Right, it's not like, I'm not saying VO2 max isn't a relevant metric, and I'm not saying VO2 max isn't something that, you know, you need to keep an eye on, because obviously you don't want to see a decrease in VO2 max. But you might start off now with a VO2 max of 45, and after 10 years worth of training, you might have a VO2 max of 50. You know, it's not a big scale, it doesn't move much, and what does that tell us? Whereas with this lactate curve, it is not only a predictor of where you are right now, but it tells us what you've been doing. If you'd have done all your training forever at zone 2 and never trained your anaerobic energy system, you'd see a very flat aerobic response to this. If you'd just done all intervals all the time and never ridden steady state, you'd see a very peaky anaerobic graph. So the nice thing from a progression measurement is you can go away, you can do a cycle of training, you can come back, use the same kit, same test, same protocol. It's very repeatable and controllable. And what we want to see is a shift to the right, right? Why a shift to the right? Well, all of a sudden, if this is our lactic threshold here at around 4, all of this additional wattage we're producing in this nice clean burning anaerobic way, right? So shift to the right, increase in fitness, shift to the left, and I normally make a joke, and you've already heard my humour, so I'm not going to, that mine shifted so far to the left I'd have to draw it on the boot of my car, but I'm not.
On the driveway.
I'm going to, on the driveway, right? That's how unfit I am right now. But I'm going to spare you my poor humour. So that's the second thing that we use this data for, is purely progression measurement, right? There's no hiding with a lactate test, right? You can't fudge it, the figures aren't, it is what it is. And not only does it measures progression, it also measures changes in where we've made that progression, whether that's aerobically or anaerobically, and the relative strengths and weaknesses between the two. The third thing that we use this data for, which for me developing programs for athletes is probably the most useful, is what this tells us about as an athlete. So I'm going to over-exaggerate these because they'd never look like this, but if you came in today and you delivered a test that looked like that, or you came in today and you delivered a test that looked like that, or you delivered a lactate curve and it looked like that, they tell us very different things about the athlete, right? So it gives us a peek under the hood as to say, where is that athlete right now? Test number 1, comparatively, the anaerobic energy system is carrying a lot more load than the aerobic, or they're a more anaerobic biased athlete. This one's obviously the flip reverse, and this one's a bit of a smart arse and is in kind of perfect balance, right? They don't look like that. I'm over-exaggerating these to make a point, right? Now the great thing about these, and we'll just take this second example here because it's a nice height for me to draw on. If you delivered a test like this today, so you came in and it's very apparent that you're very aerobically biased or dominant athlete, that's where your strength currently lays. Some of that's genetics, a lot of it is the training that you'll have done. And we look at this lactate response and I say, Kate, what are the goals for next year? And you go, do you know what, I'm fed up with bike touring, I'm going to go back to triathlon, I want to do a 70.3 and maybe a full distance, right? Well, we know with those kind of events, because of the intensity we have to use over that kind of duration, we're going to be racing predominantly, all right, there'll be hills to climb and headwinds to punch into where we'll be up here somewhere, but predominantly we're going to be rolling along here somewhere, right? In that nice aerobic state. So you'd look at this and you'd say, right, great, so your dominance is suited to the kind of event that we're doing. However, it is a predominantly an aerobic sport, so we will continue to do 75% of the work, or the polarisation in training here, and because you're relatively weak here compared, we'll do 25% of the work there, right? So that's what we call polarisation in training, right? But if you delivered this test and I said, what are the goals for next year? And you went, be the best bike tourer I can, right? Well, we know, as we were discussing earlier, that in bike tour, we are on this line here, this aerobic anaerobic contribution, we're going to be somewhere between there and there, right? Because it's flat out, right? So there's going to be high levels of anaerobic contribution. Still want to develop the aerobic energy system. So, and I'm not saying it would be as great a percentage of this, but we might say, well, actually, for the next mesocycle of training, we'll do 55% down here and we'll do 45% over there, right? And you can run that for a cycle. You can come back and retest and see if this response now looks a bit more like that response, or the training we've done have delivered the adaptations that we're looking for. So really what lactate testing allows us to do is look at the relative physiological strengths and weaknesses of you as an athlete. We can then look at what we know about the demands of our target events, and we can use that information to add a layer of sophistication in what we're doing in the macrocycle, the mesocycle, and then the day-to-day training sessions, right? For me, as a coach, to be able to do testing before I start planning with any athlete, this stuff's gold dust.
Yeah.
You know, is absolute gold dust. Does that make sense? Because I know I've done a lot of talking at you there.
No, it makes total sense. I think you're right. You can't build on what you don't know.
100% you can't.
So
100% you can't.
you need to, I'm fudging along, but I don't know what specifically I need to work on. So I think that's key, isn't it?
Do you ever, in your training sessions, do you ever think, not necessarily in the detail of, right, the polarisation this week is going to be this, but do you sort of mix it up? Like, you know, today I'm going to go and work on the top end, you know, this is what I'm going to do a more interval-based session today, or I'm going to do...
I'd keep it varied. I do keep it varied. Certainly when I was running, I was doing long runs, I was doing, you know, interval stuff, track stuff, hill work. Coming into cycling, I think that's where I've lost my way a little bit with it, because it's
you're not as comfortable, not as familiar, right?
I'm not, and I think, should I, you know, like, so with the bike, with Willow, we'll go out and we'll do, so I do specific sessions with her.
Great.
So I'll do strength sessions with her where I don't really pedal. She does all of the work. I'll do fast stuff with her where I give it, you know, as much as I can, so that she gets that speed. And we do hill stuff. We don't do so much interval now because she's up to the distance that she needs to be, and actually stopping and starting her is less productive than, because we're not
just letting her go.
We're not going to do that in a race. I don't want to instill we're going to do a kilometre.
Oh God, no! Yeah, she gets to the middle of the race and she sits down and goes, "Don't we have a rest now?"
Yeah, we normally have a rest. So we've gone past that point. So I do specific stuff with her, but with my biking, I mean, I go over to High Lodge and, you know, but everything that I do, I think this is my mindset, and this is probably where I'm less correct, is that unless I'm working hard and pushing myself and I get to the end of the session and I think,
I'm knackered,
I've done a really good job there, it doesn't feel like I've
achieved
made
anything.
Progression.
And I get that. And when you talk about polarisation in training, you also have to read that in line with periodisation. So, you know, in the middle of the racing season, do I want to be worrying about doing, you know, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 120 minutes, 4 hours, zone 2 to bolster this, or doing lots of sweet spot work to bolster that aerobic efficiency? No, I want to be race sharp. Right? So polarisation and periodisation has to work together. Because like right now, we're in the middle of the race season. You know, we do need to be, you know, thinking I've done a really good job and I've worked really hard, because 2 weekends time, you're going to be going out there and putting it all on the line and trying to bump that 4th to 3rd, right?
I think that's the tricky thing, because I've come into this